Good evening, and welcome to this called meeting of the Northside Board of Trustees. Before calling this meeting to order, the board would like to take just a moment to briefly review some of the rules for conducting our meeting. The order of business for this meeting is set out in the agenda. The purpose of this meeting is to conduct board business, and for that reason it's held in public. It is not a public forum. However, we do provide the opportunity for audience participation. If there is anyone who would like to address the board during an agenda item, we ask that you please complete a sign-up sheet located at the entrance to this room. This is so we do not overlook anyone who would like to speak to the board. We will review the rules for addressing the board later in the meeting. Is there anyone here who would like to sign up to an agenda item and has not done so? Okay, the meeting will then be officially called to order. Please stand and bow your heads as trustee Dr. Carol Harrell leads us in the invocation and pledges of allegiance.
Thank you. Almighty and merciful God, we ask your guidance and blessings upon this board, students, parents, patrons, teachers, and administrators as we are assembled here this evening in the common pursuit of this great nation's wealth, our children. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Harrell. So I know that we have some people that have signed up to speak. We do have a, prior to public comment for our agenda item, we have an item on consent. Is there a motion?
Sorry, I'm having problems getting in.
Okay.
Take a minute.
This is a vendor for a ramping system for portables that we're moving, old portables that are being moved to other sites and need newer metal ramping. And it's fairly time sensitive, which is why we've put it on this meeting instead of the normal regular meeting.
I move that we approve the portable ramping system by board.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda item. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Okay, so we have two people here to speak to budget review. Why don't we just go ahead and hear the comments
Sure.
first? And then, we value your opinions, the rules for addressing the board. We value your opinions and we will listen to what you have to say, although we are restrained by law from taking any action. Address your remarks to the board. Confine your remarks to a Northside policy or practice. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. At 2 minutes, the board secretary will hold up the yellow card. And at 3 minutes, the board secretary will hold up the red card. We ask that you wrap up your remarks at that point and do not make personal attacks on individuals. And I know that both of you have signed up to speak to budget review because this is a called meeting. The remarks need to be about budget review. Okay, so Dr. Woods?
Wanda Longoria.
School Board Trustees and Dr. Woods, I'm Wanda Longoria, educator, organizer, and proud president of Northside AFT. We're here today for you to consider our comments when reviewing your budget. We continue to come before you, the decision makers, regarding compensation, which is part of the budget for NISD employees. We've consistently stated that a 2% raise is not sufficient to retain and assist our members. We have thus proposed a 4.5 increase for teachers and IAs and a minimum of $15 an hour for all frontline workers, with built-in compression for years of experience to those delivering services directly to NISD students. We also ask the district to seriously take into account that in losing students, we've also lost employees who will not be replaced until enrollment increases beyond the students NISD currently serves. These savings should be considered during decisions around compensation. We'd like the district to answer the following question. How many employees has NISD lost, and what do those losses look like monetarily as savings? We'd also continue to remind the district that while the budget has been predicted to be at a deficit, for the past 7 years, the district has followed this pattern of underestimating revenue and overestimating expenses that brought millions of dollars in savings to the district. We understand the district is offering $1,500 to new teachers in our district, even though our starting salaries were, for the most part, one of the highest in our area. That is not the case today. There is another district that has surpassed us. Therefore, we continue to ask the district to please revamp the step salary schedule to put extra dollars toward experience rather than just new hires. We know historically from state and national data that there is a large turnover rate for new hires between years 1 and 3. It's time to invest in experience, expertise, and loyalty to this district, for we know that that is what truly makes a difference for students. Last month, you all heard from Noah Tallarico, who advocated for our support personnel and voiced that we must address the fact that many of those employees are living at poverty or below poverty level. You heard him state that in order to attract and retain these valuable and necessary employees, NISD must do better by them. We continue to ask that their salary schedule be revamped to also allow compression for years of service so that those employees who have loyally served this district over the years are making more than new hires and that their salaries are competitive. Unless the district makes these adjustments and pays more than a 2%, NISD will continue to be short-staffed, which in turn hurts our students and overall all services in the district. We thank you for listening to us and ask that you seriously consider the needs of your employees. Thank you and have a good evening.
Jamie Garcia.
Good evening. I understand today the board is considering a small raise for employees as part of their budget review. I'd like you to keep in mind that the Consumer Price Index has estimated that energy and food costs are up 9.1%, and that the food index is also up by 8%. Northside property tax appraisals are up nearly 28%. Northside personally will be getting an additional $1,300 from me of my almost $6,000 alone to Northside. It's gone up $4,000 this year. And where is that money going? We need help in the classrooms, on the campuses. We need to retain the best teachers to continue to be the best district, the destination district that we all desire. We need more than 2%. The current IA postings are not acceptable. Their pay is not where it needs to be. Other districts across the state have continued to step up and made that commitment to their IAs and to their other employees with significant raises for this next year. Northside needs to step up and do better. My husband wants to move. He argues with me every day, we need to move, we need to move, we need to move. And I have for years always argued with him. I was raised in Northside. I want to stay in Northside. I want my kids raised in Northside because it's the best. I have a harder and more difficult time every day making that point and arguing with him that Northside is still the best. I want to stay here. I love Northside. I've made that commitment. But you need to do better, please. More than 2%. That's not going to help us. Thank you.
So I'll turn it over to Dr. Barajas for the budget review. It is somewhat unusual that we have a budget review in mid-June. Obviously, some of that is because we were running a little bit behind in just timeline issues. The rest of that, though, is trying to get as good an estimate as we could on the revenue and expense side. So we'll walk through that tonight. Dr. Barajas will lead the presentation. I'll editorialize as needed.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. So before we jump into the 22-23 budget, we'll just give you a one-slide overview of where we are with the current budget, the 21-22. We've done that over the last several budget reviews to kind of give you a sense of where we are because they're separate budgets, but they're linked. And then jump into the budget development, specifically talking about compensation, growth and improvement, and then finish off with the next steps we have over the summer to get the budget presented to the board in August for consideration of approval. So the state of the current budget. Right now, with all the knowns, we are looking at including the TPAR, the target percentage attendance rate, and all the estimates of expenses, we're looking right now at about a $17.2 million deficit to end the 21-22 year. We're not going to rehash the whole TPAR. You've seen that 2 times now, but because of the adjustment the state is making, we are getting the benefit of a higher attendance rate for the first 4 6-week periods, but not the last 2 we're on our own. So all of those factors are built into the table off to the right that shows you how we think we'll end the year. Just last week, we closed period 9, which is May. So what we'll be doing is continuing to refine these as we close the remaining months of the year to see whether or not that $17 million is going to increase or potentially decrease.
One other comment that I would make, and I made this comment to Cabinet this morning, is, you know, some of the members were around in 2011, which is the last time we were facing kind of this similar kind of dire budget situation. And back then, we had kind of a known cause for it, which was state funding cuts, right? It was clear and obvious to everybody what was causing that. Here, you've got a similar situation, but it's less clear and obvious. Essentially, what you've got is the state appropriated money in the 2019 session to get itself through the next 2 budget years, the next biennium, and it appropriated dollars sufficient to fund stable, if not slightly growing enrollment and attendance that existed prior to the fall or spring of 2019. You know, what they knew back then in a pre-COVID world, attendance to look like. Well, neither one of those things has happened, right? Neither one of those things has actually occurred in reality across the state. And yet there has been, other than, as Dr. Barajas said, on the TPAR, this kind of adjustment to the attendance side, there hasn't been any adjustment for enrollment. And so those districts that have experienced enrollment loss are facing similar circumstances all across the state. Those dollars are staying in state coffers, essentially. When the comptroller stands up at a public meeting and says the state's running this massive budget surplus that now is estimated around $20 billion, some of that money is money that was appropriated for schools that simply has not been flowed to schools. So I just wanted to have y'all, the board members, understand what's going on in that situation. All right, so that's 21-22 as we're 2 months away from closing those books.
And if you look at the table, number 3, reduction of expenses due to the reclassification of ESSER 2, that's $19.9 million. That is because we were able to reclass expenses. So without that $19.2 million that we're able to move into ESSER and out of the general fund, you can see that 17 would be considerably larger. So ESSER is giving us some relief, at least during the 21-22 year.
And Esther's with us. Madam President, I just got a
Oh, I'm sorry.
question. No, and I'm sorry I didn't hit the button. Carry on.
Okay. Ms. Chumley?
It's just with us for 3 years.
It'll be with us through the end of September of 2024. That's ESSER 3.
Okay.
So moving on to,
So, I'm sorry, let me just jump back on that. So, the ESSER 2 funds, we were able to use for recurring cost, one-time cost. All ESSER is only is one-time cost. Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. But ESSER funds are gone ESSER 3 is gone as of 2024.
September of 2024,
Okay.
unless it is extended, which is something perhaps the superintendent will brief the board on. But right now, we are just expecting it to end September of 2024.
24, okay.
But Dr. Barajas, so when you say extend, that means more time for us to use those
That
dollars.
is
That
correct.
doesn't mean additional monies.
That's
Correct.
correct, yes.
And even that would require a change in federal law. So we're big time out there speculating, right? So let's not count on that. You would never build a budget based on that assumption. But there have been some conversations around that topic.
Thank you.
So starting with taxable values, again, if the board will remember, 2/3 of our revenue in the general fund comes from local taxes, and 1/3 comes from state aid. The current estimated taxable value that we are using to develop the budget is about a 10.5% increase over the number we used last year. So last year, we built the budget around $64.2 billion. This year, we're just over 71 billion as a starting point for us to determine whether or not that, we're going to see that kind of increase in taxable values. You heard earlier that, and of course, back in early May, the headlines were about these huge increases in appraised values. Remember, we don't tax on appraised values, we tax on taxable values, and there's a difference between the two. So the increase in appraised values is going to be mitigated by the increase in the homestead exemption, which went from 25 to 40. And also, there's the homestead cap, which limits a 10% increase on appraised values. So those are some mitigating factors against which, if you were to think, why aren't we looking at a 15 or 18% increase in taxable values, is because of those two factors that are mitigating that.
I'm sorry, before you go forward, does that, the over 65, help me, where they would lower the
Constitutional
ceiling?
amendments?
That
Yeah.
won't happen until the next tax year.
Right.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, we don't know the impact of that yet.
I'm just glad we don't have to do the calculations on that because somebody else will, but that won't impact us until the 23-24 budget.
The lowering of the ceiling is what I was,
That is correct. So if your taxes were frozen at a certain level and you've not benefited from the HB3 tax compression, you will now. And in fact, the question that I asked is it will be retroactive, so it won't just start from the point forward. So somebody's going to have to go through and write the algorithm to figure all that out. So that will be a decrease in taxable value to us going forward after 22-23.
and maybe this is premature to ask too. I thought somewhere I heard, and I don't, or maybe I read this, but there's an estimate as to how the tax rate, the M&O would go down. I thought I heard an estimate of maybe 12 cents. Am I misspeaking? You've not heard any estimate?
I don't know that.
We'll get into that on the next
I
slide.
mean,
Okay.
we can give you an estimate of the impact to us, but that sounds like maybe a statewide number. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
And the estimated value loss, this is provided to us by Bear County Appraisal District, of the increase in the homestead exemption is about 1.7 billion. So speaking of tax rates, so right now, we use a template that is put out by a particular firm that goes in and estimates what your state aid is going to be based on a whole bunch of factors, mainly students and the weighted funding and so on and so forth. We are looking at about a 6% decrease estimated to our MCR, the maximum compressed tax rate. Again, that's just an estimate right now, but we feel pretty good. Not only do we see it on our template, but we've also asked our state funding consultant if there's any kind of mechanism by which we can calculate for every 5% increase in taxable values, what does that translate into pennies? And at a 10% increase in property values, again, we're using 10.58, they're estimating we should see about a 6 cent decrease in our MCR. So we're using that right now. But we won't know until we get our certified values on July 25th or thereabouts. And then, of
Either
course,
way, it will be a substantial rate decrease.
yeah.
I guess I kind of wonder too if that's how well advertised that's going to be, considering there's a lot of homeowners that might be interested in knowing what that might be.
Yeah. It will not be well advertised because we will not get certified values until July, and then start bringing this to the board for consideration in August.
Right.
Under House Bill 3, if it goes down by 6 pennies, that will be the biggest decrease, largest decrease since House Bill 3. The rest of them have been in the 2 or 3 penny range. So, but again, we haven't seen this kind of increase in taxable values. And again, these are just estimates, and we'll have all that calculated as soon as we receive certified values in a little over a month, about 5-6 weeks. So just looking at tax rate history, as you can see at the very top, the tax rate from 2012 all the way to 2019 was exactly the same. That was pretty much the case for a lot of districts. Although for us, the bottom portion of that, you can see that we've kept the INS rate or the debt rate the same all the way through. And then in 2020, you can see how the bar starts to get lower. That's because of tax rate compression under House Bill 3. And unless House Bill 3 has changed, if you took this out to 2030, you'd probably see those bars going down all the way through. As property values increase, your M&O tax rate is going to decrease.
One thing I want to address is two things, actually, before we kind of leave this broad topic of tax values and the income on the district's budget, there's two issues that I think we need to we have raised in the past on numerous occasions that we need to raise again. One is the myth that because I pay more property taxes as a homeowner, that money goes to the school district. That is a myth. When the school district is capped at a certain dollar amount per student, adjusted for some weights like special education, career and technology, and so forth. When additional dollars come over what that would generate in revenue, minus what we generate in local revenue, that money just gets swept, right? Again, I go back to why, when school districts are struggling, in spite of a bunch of federal money, why does the state have a $20 billion surplus? There's a reason for that. So that's one myth. The other thing that I want to be maybe perhaps more clear about before we leave this broad topic is that House Bill 3 did a lot of good things, and all of us recognize that and we understand it. And one of the good things it did on a very temporary basis is it reset the state share versus local share. That had gotten way out of whack. As y'all remember, we talked about that for years, and how each year the state share of total funding was on a steady decline, right? We talked about that for years. House Bill 3 reset that temporarily. But if you look at the state share, if we had a graph similar to the ones that you see here, a line graph similar to the ones that you see here, since 2019 and the reset of House Bill 3, which bumped up the state share slightly, you would see that same trend that you were seeing prior to 2019, with a steady decline in the state share, such that the state share is back down to around 35-36%. And to Dr. Braha's point, as property values increase in Texas, which seems like an almost inevitability, although the lack of inflation for a long time seemed like an almost inevitability, while that has certainly been a pattern, that state share will continue to decline into the 20s before too much longer. All right, moving on.
So we get into some of the meat of this and looking at our revenues to start with. Even though state revenue, state aid is only about a third, we talk about average daily attendance and we talk about membership or / enrollment. We are building this budget around an estimated refined ADA of 93,000. The average membership ADA, which is, think of enrollment, but enrollment doesn't generate funding, membership does. For 21-22, ended just under 100,000 kids in membership. So we are predicting a 93.12% attendance rate on those 99,873.41 kids to generate 93,000 in refined ADA. But as you can see, the formula, B divided by A is equal to C, and basically it's just you're solving for X. So you could, if you know two of those variables, then you can figure out the other one, right? So if more kids show up and our membership goes up, then we don't need as high attendance rate as that 93.12. So we're going to be looking, as we always do, in September and October to see what is our membership, what is our average daily attendance, to see whether or not we're going to have to make a mid-course correction, just like we did last year. Remember, we built the current year budget around 97.5, and we were not going to hit that target, so we had to make an adjustment. So the other thing, I mentioned ESSER helping 21-22. ESSER 3 funds are yet again going to provide relief in 22-23 because programs got started late and because there are vacancies within the current ESSER plan, the entire plan. We are able to get $10 million out of ESSER 3 to supplant general fund expenditures in 22-23. So no programs are being cut, nothing is being pulled back. It's just we have that additional capacity during 22-23 and possibly even more. It depends what kind of vacancy we are running in ESSER. That we can get 10 million to reclass. So you saw the 19.9 out of in 21-22. That was ESSER 2. Now we're only talking about ESSER 3, and so we're going to lower general fund expenditures by 10 million by supplanting them with ESSER 3 dollars.
Which again, one-time money. So the bottom line is, to steal Renee's thunder, is that while we're projecting about a $17 million deficit this year, we're gonna project as of today, and this could tweak some by the time we bring this to the board for consideration in August. There is a little bit of time for tweaks, but it would be quite minor, that tweak. We'll project a deficit in the next budget year of just over $73 million.
It's sobering.
Oh, moving on.
weren't anywhere close to that when we reviewed this last time, though.
No. Well, you haven't seen this number before.
Yeah, we had
You
not
haven't
made
seen
any.
an estimate of this because we
correct.
had not yet projected revenue.
But I didn't think that we were projecting that it was gonna be so high, though.
We had actually projected,
23 at 73 million.
we had actually, in our mind, projected a higher number.
That's correct,
And
yeah.
made some cuts to try to get it down to this number.
One thing in our favor is if you look at the table on the left, that shows the average membership. You see how it went up toward the cycle 5 and 6. It was actually 4, 5, and 6. It was over 100,000. So if that trend were to continue into the next school year, then again, as I said earlier, the membership number, if it's higher, then we don't have to get that 93% ADA. We can have a number lower than that to still achieve the 93,000 ADA.
So when you showed, pardon me, is that anyone else? Okay. So last time, when we were talking about this, and we were projecting the numbers of what, because I know that the state held harmless, took us back, and so we were using the prior terms. So that's where we have the 98 and 99 for the first 3 cycles. And then so I'm struggling with some of that in relation to.
I think what's going on is you're confusing current year with next year. So we went through all that exercise. You've seen that
Right.
several times starting in February of this year. We went through all of that to justify the major adjustment we made to the budget on both the revenue and the expenditure side in February in a budget amendment that we brought to the board. That's where you saw that for the
Okay,
first
that
time.
may be what I'm getting confused
And
about.
so that's 21, 22. This is 22, 23, separate budget, but it's important to think about them, at least in part in your mind at the same time, because they do have a cumulative impact on fund balance, right?
So let me ask the question then. What you showed us last time, did we have a higher, and cycle 5 and 6 were on us, right?
That's correct.
Did we have a higher percentage of students than what we had anticipated with what you had showed us the last time we did this review?
No.
On the 21, 22 budget?
What we showed at that meeting was not actually average membership. What we showed was percentage in attendance. What Renee's showing is that while the percentage in attendance was not improved in any way, the numbers of kids enrolled actually came up uncharacteristically during the school year. As he just stated, that's a hopeful sign, perhaps, if it were to continue going forward. So,
But that didn't have an impact. So, because Renee, I remember you helped me walk through this where you said we were held harmless for these and we were able to use that average. And then the last 2, the 5, 6, we had anticipated and it was much lower so that number was higher than you're saying. We had more kids than what we thought,
we had more kids than,
but that didn't have.
but it didn't improve the attendance rate, right? The attendance rate was actually lower in cycles 5 and 6.
So what we showed the last time, we were talking about the TPAR adjustment, and remember, on our own, 21-22's ADA is 91.5% on our own.
You averaged it out to 93.
Well, the
93,000 when you took the TPAR, and then you took what y'all were thinking the attendance was gonna be for 5 and 6, and then that total averaged out at the bottom, I thought, to 93,000.
was actually about
something.
94,000 and change, but since that time, we were able to get better numbers for periods 5 and 6, which are
Okay.
on our own, which, when we dropped them in, gave us more ADA, a combination of TPAR ADA plus our own ADA. We dropped that into the template, and that $17 million number that you saw for 21-22, all that's factored in. So then we jumped to 21-22, and we're not talking about TPAR at all. Now we're just talking about
What we
average
anticipate.
membership, right? This is membership and / enrollment forgetting T-PAR. There is
No,
no
we should have
T-PAR.
said.
Right, so,
This
but,
budget is assuming no state assistance to a local budget based on enrollment or attendance.
so how much did we actually end up? So we were saying 94,000 is
I think
what
it
we
was
were.
94 and change. So again.
But then what did we actually end up in? Because are you saying that what was projected was like 93,000 and what we actually ended up with was 94? What I want to know is 5-6 cycle, what you had anticipated versus what we actually had on number of kids. I'd like to know what the difference was on that.
So what's confusing in that is you've got to pull out, when you think about it for next year, which is what you're doing, I think, is you got to pull out the adjustment in the first 4 cycles.
Oh, well,
You
and
can't
Brian,
use that.
I'm actually not. I'm still back on 21, 22. I just want to know what our actual numbers were, what we increased in attendance, that over what we had anticipated it was going to be in cycle 5 and 6.
Then this is the best illustration of that.
Okay, so,
Because this is actual ADA membership, ignoring TPAR, right? So taking away TPAR, this is actual membership, which is the combination of enrollment plus, this is enrollment. It's enrollment that actually generates funding is what membership means.
so we ended up with an increase in ADA of about 6,000?
No, so.
see, and that's where-
So in, the last time we showed this, calculation for 21, 22 using T-PAR, the last 2 periods, 5 and 6, I think we were estimating a 91 or 92,000 ADA. Yeah, okay. So the last 2 6-week periods, 5 and 6, at that time, we were estimating 89,750 for the 5th 6 weeks and 89,750 from the 6 weeks because we did not have that data, solid data, to be able to tell us where these numbers are going to be. The actual numbers came out to be that we were using for the T-PAR.
So what was our actual number then?
For the 5th 6 weeks.
Not the T-PAR, for the 5th and 6th.
Right,
What
that's
was
what
the actual number of students?
Didn't we update that? Okay, so what was the 5th
Well,
6
that's what
weeks?
that's what I'm not understanding, Corinne.
And the 5th 6 weeks is 9907, and the 6th 6 weeks is 9660, so it was just a little bit.
It was a couple of hundred more than what we had projected. So
it's
all
not a
that
big
did was
delta.
to help us increase refined ADA for 21, 22 and lower the deficit to where it is now at 17. So all that is baked into the number that we
Right,
showed.
but you're showing the 17,000, the
correct.
17 million that we have as a
That's
deficit
correct, you're right.
for 21, 22.
Now that we have solid numbers for 5th and 6th weeks, because the school year is over, we factored those in. And remember, we were on our own for 5 and 6. So the numbers were a bit, as we always are very conservative when we show numbers, then the actual ADA was higher than what we were predicting. So it helped to get to that $17 million
What it
deficit.
essentially means is that a deficit that would have been closer to 20 million is 17.
Was
That's right.
offset, but that was part of, because in the 5th and 6th cycle, we had
Slightly better.
a higher attendance.
Right.
So using that, what I want to understand is, how are you anticipating estimating what our ADA is going to be, which is going to generate our revenue for 22,
We
23?
literally, on the table on the left,
Right, which is what I was looking at.
that's the membership. So you can see the average there at the bottom in orange or whatever that color is, 99,873, which is the number under letter A under 1 above. That's where it's literally copied and pasted. So then we said, okay, we're going to assume an average attendance, like how many kids actually show up every single day, of 93.12%. That generates you an average total membership ADA of 93,000.
And so-
That is the number upon which all these assumptions are based.
So 21, 22, we were using that average at the 93%?
No.
No.
What were we
21.
using at the,
Well, remember, we started the year with refined ADA, so the 97,500 That's what we built the 21-22 budget around, 97.5. And we quickly saw that we were not going to get there. So in February of this year, we brought an adjustment to
And
push
that's when
down
we
state
came
rate.
down to the 89,750.
No, I believe what we did is, I can't remember the actual ADA that we estimated based on what we knew up to that point. But we knew that things were going to change in fact, we probably did the calculations in January of '22, seeing what we saw during the fall months and said, okay, so the pendulum swung way over, right? We're like, oh, we're not going to hit 97.5. So I think we went in and probably looked at something about 92,000 and then reran the numbers and pushed down state aid by $48 million.
And then
But-
we actually ended up being less when our numbers.
And
when
then we
were at
found out
those
from the state that we
89.
were going to get T-PAR for the
Right, which
first.
offset.
So the pendulum swung the other way to actually add more state revenue back, okay? So that's kind of what happened during 21-22. So putting 21-22 to bed, what we're doing is we're looking at what happened to membership during 21-22. So what we're saying is where we ended is where we're going to start, 98, 99,
And then you're
873.
anticipating the next
93,
cycle 4, 5, and
exactly.
6 will have the bump. So what are we
No.
anticipating that we're going to have this bump in attendance for cycle 4, 5, and 6?
Remember, that's not a bump in attendance rate.
That's last year's numbers. yeah.
And this is last year's numbers. This is the number that is expired. What we're doing here is just justifying to you as a
Exactly.
trustee how we came up with 99,873.41.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to understand.
It is simply the average of those 6 cycles.
Okay,
So simply, if we had a 22, 23, 6-week cycle, you would see 99,873 across the board. We're assuming that it's going to be the same, but it's an estimate. And then as we see that number vacillating and going up, well, okay, then great. That means more membership, or it's going to go down. We just
if
don't
we
know.
go down.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, guys, I was confused on that, so I appreciate your patience.
So just to talk about, well, what are we going to do in response to the number that we just saw earlier? So there are some mitigation measures that we can certainly start to consider, and this is not an exhaustive list or other things that we could certainly do throughout the summer months and into the new fiscal year when we start on September 1st. Certainly, because almost 90% of the budget is in positions, we could potentially look at holding positions vacant for a longer period of time to not immediately go out and hire, assuming we were so lucky to have people beating down our door who want to come work here, because again, everybody's having problems with hiring people. So that problem may take care of itself, but we will be looking at whether or not we can do that for what we're calling non-essential positions to hold them open a bit longer to save that payroll cost. We're going to review the campus carry forward process into 22-23. Review the PO carry forward process. Those two together probably sometimes could be upwards of about $12 to $14 million that we bring to the board every October in Budget Amendment Number 1 to increase the cost of the expenditures. So that's something we're going to have to seriously consider as we continue to work on the budget through the next several weeks. Continue to review ESSER 3 initiatives for us to be able to determine whether or not the 10 million that is currently projected to be supplanted with ESSER 3 can go up, potentially. Again, never impacting any kind of current program we have that is being funded by ESSER, but we will be looking at that. Review the status of students who have an NISD address but are attending another school district in Bear County. The last two, minimize overtime costs and minimize staff out-of-state travel. Those are really things we should be doing every year anyway, so. And again, this is not a complete exhaustive list. These are just some things right now that we're considering to look at as we go into the 22-23 budget.
Dr. Barajas, did,
Because we're already
sorry,
estimating.
I'm not sure that our lights are working. Maybe they're not plugged in. Can you push that again?
It's already estimated.
I'll check in a minute. How does reviewing the status of students with Northside addresses who are enrolled in another Bear County ISD, what does that do for us?
So what that means is, for a long time, and y'all know this, or many of you know this, there was kind of an agreement across the superintendents in Bear County that you would not enroll students who did not geographically reside in the district. We had plenty of competition from charters and other sources, and that was an agreement. And I'll admit, years and years ago, that agreement has eroded over time. And so that needs to be reviewed such that, we could consider If others insist on enrolling students who have a north side address, that we might choose to enroll students that have an address in District X. That's what that means.
Okay. Trustees, I think everything's plugged in, and I don't see the lights working. So if you would like to say something, please
Wave.
wave. Yeah, something.
Gotcha.
Dr. Harrell?
No, I was just waving.
Oh, okay.
Preemptive wave.
Mr. Medina?
I apologize. So just going over the budget, I know that this is, I'm pushing you way back in your presentation, but explain how the recapture impacts our district.
Well, this year it doesn't. As we talked to the Finance Committee back in, I guess it was May, we brought up the specter of whether or not we, Northside, would have to send money back to the state because we're collecting too much taxes. So we are not there yet, but if property values, in fact, Tiffany and I had worked together to come up with what we called a excess revenue calculator. So putting in all the variables, making sure that it worked correctly, and then made some assumptions like, what if we get a 12% increase in property values over the next several years and don't get any more students, right? Because it's all based on how many students do you have. There is a possibility, if those variables were to hold, that before the year 2030, we would be collecting taxes from Northside taxpayers and sending it back to the state because we have collected too much. It's called excess revenue. You can read all about it in Chapter 49 of the Education Code if you want to. But I don't refer to it as a recapture anymore because that's kind of an older term as far as I'm concerned. It's called excess revenue. So remember the capital E entitlement, that's what you're entitled to, because based on the number of students, you have 93,000 students in refined ADA, and all those students also have different issues or different weights assigned to them based on career and tech and all these other kinds of issues. So then that's your entitlement. But before we send you that money, you have to meet your deductible, and that's what you collect from your local taxpayers, right? So just think of it as we have to meet our deductible. So if we're owed $500 million by the state as our entitlement, and we can collect from our own taxpayers $400 million, the state owes us the $100 million, and we go on and we're happy. The minute that you collect more than $500 million from your taxpayers, and you're actually collecting $800, guess what? That $300 million, to make it simple, has to go back to the state, because you have now collected way more money than you're eligible for, essentially what it comes down to. We're not there yet. But we have looked at it, and again, if we see another 10% increase in property values over the next several years, that we very could well be in that situation, so, for the first time ever.
Yeah, it's not an immediate
Unbelievable.
concern.
No.
It's more of an intermediate term, maybe even longer term concern. But with values rising as quickly as they have, it comes up in the rear view a lot quicker than you would have anticipated when single digit.
I just hear it statewide that there's becoming an issue in some of our.
You know the comment I made to you about House Bill 3 resetting the whole state share issue? This is exactly the same thing. House Bill 3 reset what we then called recapture, that we now call excess revenue, but it functionally works exactly the same. So it reset, it lowered recapture at the time, but recapture is on the rise, just like state share is on the fall. Those trends are going to be linear, right? Recapture is going to look like this. State share is going to look like this, in part because of recapture, but not completely because of recapture. So, or excess revenue. So that's not an issue for us in the near term. But the reason you're hearing it is because folks are saying, wow, just 3 years ago we kind of wrote this off as not a worry for us, and now it's creeping back into people's consciousness. That's why you're hearing about it.
So again, it's not anything that we're worried about, at least for the next 2 years, but the only way to mitigate sending money back to the state is get more kids. So that's how that works. And of course, we have several legislative sessions which they could go in and change the rules again to kind of kick that can down the road. If they hear that Northside and Houston and Austin and Cy-Fair are all paying into the state now, the top 4 districts by enrollment, that kind of gets them, kind of sweaty under the collar and say, oh, we got to fix this because we can't have all these big districts sending money back to the state. But the state doesn't control property values, appraisal districts do, so there you go.
I've got a question. Okay, so on 21-22, you said that the budget reflected that part of the savings, or not savings, credit, I guess, you said the expenditure reduction was due to vacancies. So the lower expenditures was due to vacancies. However, that is not a reduction for the 22-23 budget.
It's already calculated in. We use the same assumptions that we have this year.
Okay, but aren't some of those positions that we will want to fill?
No doubt. The issue is that we used to assume things like a 98% fill rate. That's no longer a reasonable assumption, so Esperanza's gone through and kind of sanitized the budget with a much more reasonable, doable fill rate, and that lowers expenditures. That's the reason we adjusted it in 21-22 is because we didn't start the year that way, but once we realized what the hiring circumstance was going to look like, we quickly made that adjustment. We can pretty much bake that in to 22-23 and adjust, from there.
So your 22-23 is based upon us not filling the vacancies that we had for 21-22.
No, it's based on us assuming a similar vacancy rate to existing positions as we have experienced in
Same thing I'm saying,
21-22.
but just in a different way, Brian?
Well, but it's not tied to individual positions.
No, but
We
we're
might
talking about
fill
the
one
vacancies.
that we didn't have in 21-22 filled, but a different one would stay open because you couldn't hire somebody in it. Or because we intentionally left it open as a cost mitigation measure.
Right, so we're saying the same thing.
Okay.
So the vacancy rate that we are now looking at, then we're also talking about a mitigation measure, holding additional positions, so,
That's correct.
okay.
Yep.
So we're using a a higher vacancy rate to begin with and factoring what our budget looks like for 22-23. And then we're also saying that there may be other positions on top of that that we would hold vacant intentionally
That's correct.
to help mitigate
Right.
what we're looking at.
You cannot carry forward into future budget years a multi-tens of millions of dollars deficit budget.
Oh, no, Brian, I understand that.
So
That I
these are
understand
not-
completely.
These are not things we have fully baked, but they're things we have discussed to try to improve the situation as we go through 22-23.
And I think the important piece here is that we're not eliminating positions, we're holding
course not.
some more vacant. We're just holding some vacant a little bit longer than, for a
I guess I'm
longer
just-
period.
At some point, it doesn't have to be tonight, I would like to understand what positions are out there that can be held vacant without impacting students.
Well, I think that's up to the eye of the beholder. I mean, what we would do is try to define these as non-campus-based positions for the most part. And so you could argue that they wouldn't perhaps have a direct impact, but they'd have an indirect impact.
Absolutely. 'Cause
So, I mean, that's the kinds of positions we're talking about. We would obviously do everything we could unless things got really, really bad to avoid campus positions. But non-campus positions, I can almost guarantee will be targeted first.
Okay, thank you.
And for the first time, since, remember, the board will adopt, or consider for adoption 3 funds, the general fund, which we've talked about for months, and then finally child nutrition and debt service. So this is the first time you're looking at child nutrition. So if you look over to the right, things are going to be okay. We had that during COVID, and there were a lot of issues regarding, the number of meals we weren't serving, but things have rebounded. So child nutrition is looking at having a pretty good year next year in 22-23 based on their estimates of how many meals they're going to be serving. You can see a couple of bullets increasing the entree items, adding 9 new CEP, Community Eligibility Provision campuses. The next to last bullet, which says free and reduced meal applications will resume for meal benefit at non-CEP campuses. In other words, no longer will every student in NISD eat for free. That's what essentially that means, where we've been doing that for the last 2 years.
No longer will every student in the country eat for free.
That's
So,
correct.
yeah.
So it's not something that we are doing. It's just that's how we're going to be entering
At
22-23.
CEP campuses, every student eats for free, regardless whether they have free or reduced paperwork or not. That's what a CEB campus is.
Would that be like, how is it, like the title school?
Yeah, it's determined by eligibility based on economic disadvantage percentage, yeah.
So if we have a school that has 95%, then that's going to be a
It's
CEP.
guaranteed to be a CEP school.
CEP.
And lastly, there's no student meal price increases for what, so it's going to be the same as what they were the last time the students were paying, so.
Bottom line is, if we could figure out how to borrow money from child nutrition, we might consider it.
I do have a question before we leave here. Actually, two questions. One, and I guess that's the first time I heard that, so not every child is eligible for a free meal beginning this coming school year.
The feds did not reauthorize that.
I understand that. Have we told that
About
to
the
our
summer.
parents? We have?
Yeah, we have.
How about the summer?
Summer goes back to the same old rules we've always had,
And then
COVID.
And then the next question is, we all know what's happening with the cost of food. Is there is an inflation piece figured into these numbers?
Mr. Weary?
Hi, Mr. Weary.
How are y'all doing tonight? Food costs, supply costs, you've seen and heard this whole year. It's been some problems with it. So yes, there's been some adjustment on how much our food cost is going to cost us, as well as labor, depending on how that goes. So we do a % of revenue. So as long as we maintain the 45% of revenue, like on food, and this year was like 39%. So you could take that 5%, and we use that for measures, in case food costs rises. Now, all of our bidding, everything is done for next year. So because we're a direct to manufacturer, you're not seeing or hearing like other school districts. We get the 18-wheelers straight to our warehouses. So our cost has gone up a little bit, but not like what you've heard.
Yeah, fortunately, child nutrition doesn't shop at HEB, so we don't see in the child nutrition department exactly what all of us see when we go to HEB. It's different.
And that's all relative. You didn't, taking out of context, that might not be the
Has nothing
great
to do with
thing.
HEB.
Yeah, I know.
I don't care
I'm
where
just-
you shop. You're
Just
seeing inflation.
clarification.
We shop at a slightly different scale for child nutrition than each of us does for our homes.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank
Wait,
you.
don't
Unless
leave.
somebody, okay.
Yeah, don't.
Ms. Chelman?
So did you have any problems with the logistics piece, with getting our food?
So throughout the year, and if you don't know, we have 2 functional warehouses. So we increased our capacity so that we can have more foods come in. And that's why we streamlined our menu to 2 entrees across the board, so that we knew that what we could have, that we did, and we did a really good job at that. So next year, we're going back to the new normal, but like 3 entrees at elementary, 4 to 5 entrees at middle and high school, for variety and also to increase participation.
And so you were able to get the food, you
Yes.
anticipate that was the
Yes.
same thing.
Yes.
So I need one of y'all to explain to me, because Brian, it's been a while since, and I just don't remember what the normal summer program looks like, because we've been feeding families and kids for the past, 2.5 years. And so
30
what-
seconds on the summer feeding rules.
Yeah, I just want to understand, so do all kids get to eat this summer, and then they go back to having to pay for meals come the fall? Are all kids not eligible to eat this summer?
Okay, so the summer program is a community eligible program. So the only campuses we have open is free feeding for 18 and under.
Because we were feeding people during the summer that were just in need. I didn't think that we were.
Yeah, we're back
We weren't
to-
asking for IDs or.
Anybody who we went through several iterations of those rules that I'd love
But we
not to
pretty
go
much
through.
fed everybody that we could,
Sometimes we
Brian.
did, sometimes we couldn't.
Well, we tried.
We tried. and we advocated for it when we couldn't. But the rule is, at those sites where we're running these programs and Thomas's staff is working serving meals, anybody who shows up who's 18 or under eats at that site. Enrolled in Northside, not enrolled in Northside, whatever. They show up,
CEP school.
one of these community eligibility schools.
Right. So in the summer, it's 18 and under community. We feed them. The difference right now is the waivers went away. There's no grab and go. There's no curbside. So the students have to eat
They have to
on
come
campus.
in and eat on campus.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So, in those scenarios that we've seen, where teachers know children are going hungry, they can let them know that they can go to X, Y, or Z school and still be able to be fed during the summer.
During the summer.
Sure.
I'm really worried about our kids.
During the summer.
Today, we served almost 15,000 meals in our summer program.
Yeah, it's a healthy number.
Yeah. Well, I think we found throughout COVID that there were a lot of kids that weren't eating, and we weren't aware of it either. And a lot of kids don't share that, but at least they had a place they knew to go get food.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, and so now they continue to show up, right?
Yeah, and what do we do?
And of course, enrollment in summer programs is higher and all that.
Right.
Thank you, Thomas.
Okay, thank you.
You.
Thank you.
And with all that money, maybe Thomas can buy a Northside Nick a new mascot costume. The lemur, I think it is. So moving to the next budget, the last one that the board consider for adoption is debt service, which of course is the fund that collects taxes to repay all of our previously issued bonds. Keeping the debt rate the same, we've talked about that during the bond election leading up to it. That will remain at 3,355, no change there. You can see the principal payments of 83 million, interest payments of 81, and the board may want to consider in August, we will be bringing a defeasance resolution. Defeasance simply means just paying off debt, somewhere of about $70 million because of the property value increases that we're seeing. We're able to pay off that higher rate debt faster, like we've done since about 2016. So
Just remember that 70 million is not eligible for general fund expenditures. Dollars do not flow in that direction in Texas under law.
So looking at going back to the general fund, the compensation aspect of it, that's
So
a big
just
driver.
a little preview, because we're going to show you very quickly compensation, growth, and improvement, because we've been through this with you a bunch.
Yes.
There is no change to what was originally proposed in compensation. There is a somewhat small reduction to G&I purely in central office type positions to try to bring that number down 1.1, 1.2 million, somewhere in there. Okay.
So this is no different than what the board saw the last time we met to talk about compensation, as you can see, broken out by the different funds, general fund, child nutrition. Looking at the 2% midpoint increase, which is 1,250 for teachers and other teachers tied to that particular hiring scale. 4% increase for auxiliary, and I believe that the board has received twice a list of all those positions that fall under that category of auxiliary. And then some reclassification, stipends, and other adjustments of about 1.2, and market adjustments anywhere between 90 to 100% of about 1.3, bringing the total general fund compensation package to just 19.5 million. And again, you've seen this before, and this will be on the June 28th board meeting for the board to consider for approval to be included in the adopted budget.
One request that I have is when we do bring it back for approval, for discussion and possible approval, that you bring back that what we know is occurring in Bexar County, because I can tell you that what's going to happen is there's going to be a media report that says, and I don't even know how we do this because I don't want to talk about another school district, but when we give a 2% increase and another district gives a 6% increase, it makes us look like we're not paying attention. But in fact, when you look at the end dollars, our pay structure is still higher, even at a lower increase in salary. Am I making sense? So when this goes to the media, I don't know how we can emphasize that, but I'd like to be able to mention that.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
And again, looking at growth and improvement, again, this is information that the board has already seen, save for a few adjustments that we actually pushed some things down within growth and improvement, but not in these particular cases where the new elementary startup, the new school base with the magnets, and of course, the big high school opening up. And that has already been approved. That was approved back on April 26th. Again, this was also approved what we call the campus-based units. No change there, just kind of reiterating the information that the board has already seen. Non-campus-based units. Now, this will be for the board to consider again on the 28th. I believe there were some changes made to this from the first time the board saw it. I think we pushed it down by a few FTEs, but here's a list of all the non-campus-based units that the board will take up for consideration on June 28th for approval.
The bottom line is an addition of 6 FTEs.
And moving on, other initiatives within G&I. We didn't list all of them, but what you see listed in front of you represents 85% of that $8.2 million.
Led by covering health insurance cost increases for 2023.
Plan year 23.
Yeah, sorry, I had to think that through.
Which, again, that's only for 8 months because the 22-23 budget goes from September to August. So, but the plan year for our medical is on a calendar year, so this is essentially picking up that cost from January to August, and then we'll have to decide what's going to be for the next 23-24 budget. And again, these other initiatives in G&I are also being brought to the board for approval on the 28th of June. The items removed from the last time that the board saw this, it's about 1.1 million that we reduced. Again, nothing, there was a staff auditor that was originally in the non-campus space units. We've brought that down to 1. The ROTC program at Sotomayor.
What happened with that?
For the first time ever, we're not granted a unit through all of the efforts, including some on the political side, not just on the military side. And so in this current climate, we treat it as a removal of something we would have obviously added, to a new high school. And so the military's been told, you got 1 year to make this right, and then we're going to have to put something else, another program in that space.
Do they think they'll be able to make it right?
The way I've been told behind the scenes leads me to believe that there's a better chance next year than there was this year. They have cycles of awarding these things, but there will be a cutoff time where we've just got to make a decision, right, and move forward. This, as of next year, and for the first time ever, this will be the only high school campus without an ROTC unit.
What kind was it going to be?
Well, we were never awarded a unit. Our preference is Air Force just because of the nature of the active duty positions in this geography. But we reached out to everybody. We were agnostic with regard to division or military service. We asked to everybody. Didn't happen. Spent 2 years on it, including with an assistant secretary that I just happened to have a relationship with. Didn't happen. And of course, I'm not. I know I'm coming off as sounding critical. I'm not happy about it. But they have their own set of budget constraints and issues that I'm sure I don't understand. So
On an ROTC, what do they pay? I mean, what's the military cost?
that's a really complex answer to how we split that. Unfortunately, it's literally instructor by instructor. It's quite complex. They pick up a healthy portion. You can think of it as a little less than half, and
So-
we pay the rest.
So if we're looking at 201,000, then the military's 150,000?
100, 150, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in that range. Okay.
But it's not all about. And again, it's not all about money. They also have their own disproportionality issues that they worry about, like how many units exist in Texas compared to other states, and
But we're bigger.
how many, true, but how many on a per capita basis, and, how many are in underserved areas. They have all these kind of issues to deal with that, all we want is a darn unit because we think it's important and kids want it, but, not our call. At least in the short term, not our call.
And just a graph showing kind of how the $24 million in G&I is broken up between new school startup, new school base, and then the other initiatives. And lastly, here's where we are. We're doing the fourth budget review. Later in the month, again, the board will consider for adoption the compensation plan, the G&I packages, the non-campus based units. That approval will give us then the ability to incorporate them into the recommended budget that the board will consider for adoption in August. And then we wait until July, and of course, we'll be going through and continuing to work on 21, 22 during June and July, but we have to sit around and wait for those certified values to come in. That is going to determine what our MCR is, and then we'll know whether it's 6 cents or 5 or 7. And in August, we go back to the procedural thing of having the board call for the public hearing, have the public hearing, and then you will adopt the budget and the tax rate at the same meeting, and we are ready to go for 22, 23. And the budget process starts all over again.
Dr. Barajas, so we have, I know we're going to look at the calendar. Are there still 3 meetings in August?
We're negotiating that.
Okay,
We'll get back to you on that.
okay.
May depend on some other factors not directly related to budget adoption.
Okay, questions from anyone? On the board? Okay,
Dr. Barajas, thank you and your staff for all the work that you did for this. I do want you to know that I'm very unhappy we cannot give teachers a bigger raise, but I certainly understand the position we're in, and thank you all for your hard work.
good point.
Yeah, I think, and just to echo what Ms. Saldana's saying, with Renee's got a lot of support in getting this developed, and Tiffany and Esperanza and Susan, all those folks have a big role in that. So this isn't a one-person show, and it's certainly not me showing, but those 4 people put it all together.
Thank you for that comment. Anyone else? Mr. Blunt?
Yeah, and I say it's rhetorical because I don't know if there's an answer to this one. Just sort of following up on yours. The one thing I do not know, I just thought about what we were just communicating, is what a teacher should be paid. And what I mean by that is, agree with, we know there's more, we're not underpaid, but I've never actually seen the state actually do a study and say, hey, this is where teachers should be paid, so we know that amount, total out and say, okay, this is the gap we got. Because otherwise, every year we're going to be, we've been saying that since I've been on the board.
Yes, sir.
I've seen it for other fields. I can tell you I can do it for engineering and et cetera. But anyway, it's sort of rhetorical.
Yeah, it's quite rhetorical. That actually exists in state law, believe it or not.
Oh.
The requirement to do that study once a biennium exists in state law. For some reason, it's just never gotten done.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Sounds like an advocacy item agenda.
I
Indeed.
agree.
Follow the law that already exists.
Well, and then there's that.
So wouldn't
Ms. Chumley?
that be, Brian, so Bobby, to what you're saying, I've always thought it was so strange that the state has that salary scale, the step scale. I've always thought that.
The state doesn't impose a step scale. The only thing
Well,
the
it
state,
says the minimum, I thought
Right.
it says that the scale the state has is that you can't pay
under a certain amount.
under a certain amount.
The state simply has a
Which is-
minimum scale, which is,
Nothing.
No,
Yeah.
it's terrible.
you
Well,
don't,
we've
you don't
always
want to
paid
come
above
close to that.
state-based.
But, yeah, that's the only thing, in state statute, the only thing they are required to do is set a minimum and adjust that minimum as state funding
Right.
becomes available
I
and
just-
appropriate.
Think of those districts that can't afford
Sure.
and are paying that, God forbid. So on that, though, go back and explain, because I know the question that we're gonna get from teachers nurses and counselors that are on that scale. That there's not a step, that when we look at this, we don't talk about a step. Because remember, a while back, it was, okay, am I getting 1250 plus that
Right.
step? And so I just, I want to
So-
make sure that we are clear when when we're able to explain this, that what we're talking about is $1,250 across the board.
That's correct. Whatever percentage that works out to be, it's $1,250 across the board. A step, as people frequently use in the world of teacher pay, is simply the differential between years of experience.
Right.
It's a measure of the size of the gap. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. It's a measure of the size of the difference. That's what it is.
And so, but when we did our 90 or 100% market adjustments and reviews, so going back to what President Freeman had said, because I know that, and I understand exactly, having a husband who was on that far end of the years of service with the district, and I know that there was a period of time where we focused very highly on that upfront piece, where we worked real hard to get that starting salary up. But, and then I remember Brian going back where we would see this graph where it would say, okay, from a market standpoint, we're good now starting, but then we'd have like year 8, we'd go down like this. And so we'd come in and we'd say, okay, from 8 to 12, we've got to increase that because we're below that. So if we were doing that line now with current salaries, is that line above that market
Yes.
for all
Experience levels.
experience levels? So we don't have any.
And I think
Any
we've actually
dips?
shown at some point like a 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25-year experience and shown where that is above the mean in the market. But the answer is it's above the mean in the market in every one of those.
Across that whole line,
That's correct.
we're above.
Because at one point, we leveled out, back in the day.
Right, 20 plus.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago, we did that. Unless you were grandfathered if you were in the district, but anybody coming in new wasn't. And we still have that,
Still have it.
Okay, and then, Renee, I had a question. I thought it was interesting what the young woman indicated, because I agree, electricity, gas, food costs don't as much after hearing from Mr. Weary. But you factored in, you have factored into that 22-23 budget what we are to me, it's going to be extremely hard to know exactly when inflation is going to stop. And so what have you used to factor in? Because I thought I saw 602,000 for increase in utilities cost.
Yeah, we factored in both
So-
a utilities cost increase and a fuel cost increase.
Right, gas.
Needless to say, that it will be something that will probably have to be adjusted, hopefully not up, in BA 1 or 2 in the fall or winter
Okay, 'cause
months. It'll
that's
just
up.
be something that may have to be revisited if our assumption is way off.
And I'm
Utility
really worried
costs,
about it.
when you're in a municipal utility, you pretty much know what that's going to be. That you can pretty much predict that. It's fuel that's much more market driven, and thus subject to kind of the whims of the market. But again, it's not like those of us buying gas 1 tank at a time
No.
at Exxon, right? That's not the way we buy fuel. And so while we are subject to market forces like anybody else, the extreme nature of that market force has a tendency to be tamped down when you buy in the volume that we buy in and so forth.
And so on the new buses that are part of, no, that was part of the bond. But I know that we used to do a lot with the propane, right? But we're buying new buses that are gas. So are we moving away from the propane?
No, we're not moving away from propane. What we try to do is maintain a balance between fuels and buses. We're heavily invested in propane and see no move away from that. But there comes a cycle where you're going to buy more diesel buses than you would in another cycle, or buy more gasoline buses than you would in another cycle.
I was just curious on it, though, from the fuel cost piece, from the fuel perspective.
There is a
If there's something that we need to look at, because I'm, and I may just be pessimistic at this point, which after seeing this budget, I
Well,
am.
remember, consider that we're a service industry, so 90% of our expenditures we control, meaning salaries and benefits, right? So that 10%, if there is some increases in fuel and
pretty small.
electricity, it's manageable. Yeah, so again.
You're working on the margins of the budget,
Right.
not with the big chunks of the budget. When you're talking about things like utilities and fuel costs and that kind of thing, it's in the 10%, not the 90. Like
Still,
things.
savings to me is savings to me
Yeah.
is savings,
Well,
Brian.
and
So
as
whether
you
I'm in the
saw-
10% or I'm in the 90%,
As-
guys,
as
to me,
you-
you
as
save
you-
money in your budget, you
As
save
you
money.
saw in those potential mitigation measures, some of those are in the 90%, most aren't. Most are in the 10%.
Was just, because I remember for years, we really touted that, and there was a savings on that in
You're
doing
talking about
that.
propane.
I'm talking about using
Well,
alternative fuels.
And there still is. There's just operational needs that have to be met, right? Propane is not something you can take on a bus on a long-range trip with kids because you can't guarantee you're going to be able to refuel.
Right.
So you got to have other methodologies.
And that's why we have the half and half that we try to maintain. Okay,
all right.
that was it.
Anyone else?
Oh, I just have one request. I'd like a hard copy of the budget review that we had at the last meeting, and a hard copy of this one, too.
Okay. Anything else? There are no objections. We are adjourned.